You've probably seen the headlines lately.
Fire and destruction across the Middle East this Saturday night.
Israel called it Operation Roaring Lion. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury.
Since the 2000s, there's been plenty of conflict surrounding the Middle East.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
The United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
And every time it happens, people say the same things. Oil, gas prices, maybe the stock market. But there's a second domino that almost no one talks about, and it matters even more than oil. Fertilizer. Because when fertilizer prices spike, the price of everything you eat rises. When there's conflict or instability in the Middle East, there are actually two economic stories that are unfolding at the same time. The first one everyone knows. Oil prices go up. Shipping gets more expensive, gas gets more expensive, the entire global economy feels it. But there's a second story that's much quieter, and it starts in a place that you might have never heard about. A huge portion of the world's energy has to pass through a single narrow passage, the Strait of Hormuz. This tiny stretch of water, only about 20 miles wide, is one of the single most important trade routes on Earth. Every day, massive oil and gas shipments move through it. About 20% of the world's oil consumption passes through the Strait of Hormuz daily. That's around 17 to 20 million barrels of oil a day. And also about 20 to 30% of the world's global natural gas supply. So roughly about 1 in every 5 barrels of oil passes through this tiny narrow choke point. And that means if anything threatens this one location, conflict, tension, even just uncertainty, energy prices will spike dramatically. This is the part that everyone talks about. When the world's energy supply gets constrained, it's like a giant snake constricting itself around the entire global ecosystem. Everything gets more expensive. Think about flights, shipping, and logistics. Everything that runs and depends on gas becomes more expensive. For example, the millions of semi-trucks in the US that are like the lifeblood of the US. Every shipment gets more expensive, and that ripples through the entire economy. But here's the thing, that's only the first domino. Here's the part that most people miss. Let's talk about fertilizer. Modern agriculture doesn't just run on soil and water. It runs on fertilizer. Fertilizer is the key to making sure that farmers around the globe can produce enough food for the world. And about half of the global food production depends on fertilizer. Fertilizer is made from natural gas. It's through a process that turns gas into ammonia, which becomes fertilizer, which becomes food. Natural gas is about 70 to 90% of the cost in nitrogen fertilizer production. Fertilizer is heavily traded globally and not locally produced everywhere. A huge part of global fertilizer is produced and stored in the Middle East. Because in order to make fertilizer profitable, you have to produce it in a place with cheap natural gas. And countries in the Middle East have some of the cheapest, most abundant supplies of natural gas in the world. And major exporters around the globe are Russia, China, and in the Middle East, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But here's the thing, the West doesn't want to rely on natural gas from Russia. This is due to political reasons, but also Russia depends on natural gas exports to fuel its war machine. And the West doesn't want to support Russia's war in Ukraine. And China, the other large exporter, controls its exports. And so, many countries are entirely dependent on natural gas from the Middle East, which makes them more vulnerable to shocks. We saw a real example in 2022. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, sanctions hit Russia and natural gas prices surged. But additionally, Russia and Belarus are some of the largest fertilizer exporters in the world. They export potash, nitrogen fertilizers, and key agricultural inputs. When the war hit, everything happened at once. Exports were disrupted, sanctions limited supply, and prices skyrocketed. At the same time, natural gas, which is needed to make fertilizer, became more expensive. As a result, fertilizer prices doubled globally. In some regions, there was a threefold increase. Farmers around the world had to adjust. Imagine you're a farmer. Last year, fertilizer cost you $100 per acre. This year, it's $200. You have 3 options. Spend double, use less, or plant less. None of those options lead to cheaper food. And this reduced overall food production. Following this, food prices surged. Wheat, corn, and vegetable oils all became more expensive. And we've already seen in the current conflict that the world's largest natural gas facility has already been struck and compromised. And this is where everything connects. Conflict in the Middle East means growing risk in the Strait of Hormuz. These massive oil tankers are crewed by hundreds of real people. When there are missile threats and a constant looming danger, some shipping companies start pulling back. Tankers delay routes, insurance costs skyrocket, and in some cases, they won't cross at all. So even without a full blockade, just the fear is enough to slow down supply. As a result, energy prices spike and fertilizer becomes more expensive. Farming becomes more expensive, which means things like grain, fruit, vegetables, and even meat become more expensive. And as a result, food prices go up. These things add up step by step, all the way to your grocery bill. Here's why this matters globally. In wealthier countries like the US, this just shows up as inflation. But in poorer countries, it can mean food shortages, instability, protests, even political crises. All from the same chain reaction: energy, fertilizer, food. So the next time that you see headlines in the Middle East and everyone starts talking about oil, remember, that's just the beginning of the story. Because the real impact flows through a narrow strait, moves through energy markets, and that's why the US is so focused on the Middle East. Because a tiny choke point on the other side of the world can decide how much you pay for dinner.